I'm Jan Fettler, a UC Master Gardener of Sacramento County since 2011 and a honeybee keeper since 2019. The honeybee, is it one word or two? The dictionary people say one word. The entomology or the bug experts say two, so I'm using two in my talk today, but it's right either way. I will not be talking about beekeeping today, but I will be talking about honeybee behavior and some of the challenges they face and what you can do to help them. Bees are pretty important. This isn't only honeybees, this is all bees. They pollinate a third of our food. It's estimated that if they were all to disappear, so would we. A few honeybee factoids. Bears, when they come out of hibernation in the spring, coincide with a very big growth of baby bees in the beehive. People think that bears are going for the honey in the hive, but what they actually want is protein, which is found in the bee larva. So they're actually going into the beehives to find bee larvae to eat, and they get a little honey as kind of a fringe benefit. Bees are attracted to scents. You shouldn't wear some perfumes or even essential oils if you're going to be around somebody who has a beehive. The bees will be attracted to you, which means they'll come and smell you, hover around you, maybe even land on you. Most people do not want a bee to land on them, and they tend to do anything they can to stop it, which can then sometimes make them mad enough to sting you. Just don't wear perfume. Bees don't fly if the temperature is 55 degrees or less. So for parts of the winter, you won't see bees. They'll be in their hive staying warm. Honeybees are the only bees that store honey. Flowers produce higher sugar in 3 minutes after experiencing bees. Scientists found that flowers exposed to the low frequency of a bee hum actually made more sugar. It was amazing to me to think that they have this kind of relationship with the flowers that they are visiting. Honey. You may already know that raw and heated honey will crystallize, and some people think that they don't want that, so they would like it to be liquid again. You can put the jar in a bowl of warm water, not too hot, and it will become liquid again, and it'll probably crystallize again after that. My husband actually likes the crystallized honey because he likes to spread it like peanut butter. Honey does not spoil. There are a couple of reasons for this. It lacks moisture. When the bees bring the nectar in, it's got quite a bit of moisture in it, but in the process of getting it ready to be honey, they take the moisture out by fanning it and keeping any moisture from getting to it. It's also very high in sugar content. Sugar acts as a preservative by binding any water that is left in the liquid nectar, binding it so that the spoilage organisms can't reach it. Honey will be fine to sit on your shelf without refrigeration forever, but eat it because it's great. Honey is actually not, they don't make honey for us. They're actually making honey for themselves, and it's the winter storage for their hive. It's their food for the winter. If you ever drive by a field and there are a bunch of beehives sitting out in it and they have quart jars sitting on the top, what probably happened is the beekeeper took too much of the honey and is supplementing their winter feed with sugar water. Sugar water in those jars is not a replacement for honey for the bees. It's better to leave them enough honey to get through the winter with their own stores. You can always take honey in the spring when they're starting to bring in a lot of more nectar to make more honey. But wintertime is, you need to leave it for them. Honey is the only product made by an insect that humans eat. Another product the honeybees make is propolis. It's something they get from tree sap. It's very sticky. You can see this picture shows 2 hive boxes that had a little crack in between them. Bees don't like any place where air, like we do. We don't want air flying in our house in the wintertime. So they seal up cracks. They don't want air or light or insects or anything else that could come through that crack. They seal it with propolis. That stuff goes on kind of sticky, and then it hardens, and you have to pry that loose. That is serious stuff. Another thing they do with their propolis is they line the inside of the beehive. And what this does is, because of the antibacterial and antifungal properties of propolis, it keeps any moisture from getting moldy in the wintertime when the hive tends to have a higher humidity inside. Royal jelly. Royal jelly is secreted from the glands and the heads of young workers. This was very weird to me. I never thought about where royal jelly came from. It's very high in protein. It's fed to baby bees in their first 3 days of life. If it's fed to baby bees for their entire 6 days of life, it will become a queen. It's the main food for the queen as an adult. Pheromones. We talked about wearing perfumes around a beehive. The queen, they're producing plenty of their own, so there's no sense in you adding any to confuse them. The queen produces a pheromone to let them know, everybody know in the hive, that she's there. If something happens to her, it's a signal for the workers to make new queens. The queen also creates pheromones that lets her worker bees know certain things have to happen. Like in the spring when it's mating season, she'll make drone bees. That's the only time of the year she does that. Well, she indicates to the workers that she's going to do that, so they know to make a cell and how to take care of the baby bees as they hatch. Worker bees at the hive entrance will emit a pheromone to let foragers that are out know where their home is. A lot of beekeepers line hives up side by side. Well, no bee is ever going to go in the wrong hive because they know exactly what their hive smells like. And so that's where they go back every time. They will create an alarm pheromone when they sting you. It smells like bananas, although frankly, most people don't wait to smell what it's going to smell like. After a bee stings them, they want to get out of there right away. But what that banana smell does is it tells other bees in the hive that there's something wrong and they better come out and investigate. It's an alarm pheromone, and that may cause the other bees to sting you as well. Brood emits pheromones to let the workers taking care of them know what their gender, their development, and their feeding needs are. Lots of perfume going on in that hive. Here are the characters that are in the hive at any time. Drones are the only males. Those are usually only there in the spring. The queen, there's one queen per hive, and the workers that are all females. Drones are the only males, and as I said, only there usually in spring and summer, which is mating season. Their only job is to mate. They're very high maintenance. They cannot feed themselves. So somebody's always, one of the workers, they've always got to be feeding him. They're cast out at the end of the season because they're going to be a drain on food reserves, and because they're too much work for the girls to have to do. They tend to chew off the drone's wings and kick them out the front door so they can't get back in. The hive goes through the winter all female. It doesn't pay to be a drone. The queen. There's one queen per hive. You see her in the middle of the picture here. She's a big girl. Her scents regulate unity in the hive, so everybody knows everything's fine if they can smell her. She lays lots of eggs, as many as 1,500 a day. And because of that, she can't feed or groom herself. She's way too busy laying eggs to take care of herself, so the workers need to do that for her. The queen can live 2 to 4 years, and a lot of that has to do with how cold the winter is. In a cold winter, a queen will stop laying eggs completely, so she lives longer. She's not working as hard. In California, they tend to live a little shorter lives because we don't have very cold winters, pretty mild, and the queen can lay eggs year round. Not as many in the winter, but she is working year round, so that takes more of her energy. If a queen leaves or dies, the workers replace her, and there's quite a process involved. She indicates, especially if she's getting sick, they know that because they're with her all the time. And if she's going to leave the hive, she indicates that to them too. They will make new queens, usually several, to replace her so that they are sure to get a good one. The fittest, because they'll duke it out until one is left, the fittest will leave the hive and mate and come back. So the hive goes on. Speaking of mating, mating is done 200 to 300 feet up in the air, a mile or more away from the hive. In mating season, the drones wake up in the morning and they think, okay, let's go. They fly up to the mating zone and they wait there for virgin queens to arrive. The new queens will mate midair with several drones, not just because they're hussies, but because they're trying to get diversity in offspring. They can mate with as many as 20 drones, and they mate for life. Once they're mated, they don't have to mate again. They store sperm in their bodies for the rest of their lives. The drones die after mating. Tough life to be a drone. This diagram shows the reproductive cycle of bees, which is like butterflies. It's called complete metamorphosis. It starts with an egg in cell 1. The queen lays an egg. 3 days later, it hatches into a little grub-like creature like a caterpillar. It's a caterpillar stage for about 6 days, and then it becomes a pupa or cocoon in stage 3, which is when it's capped off and nobody feeds it anymore. And then it hatches. And depending on what hatches, it is in varying time periods. If it's going to be a queen, it only takes 16 days from egg to adult queen. If it's a worker bee, 21 days, and a drone, it takes the longest, 24 days to go from egg to adult drone. This picture shows a brood chamber. Everything you see that's capped off in this picture is baby bees. We'll start with the queens because they're easiest to see. The queen cells, there's 2 of them in this picture. They kind of look to me like unshelled peanuts. They're big. There's a big insect inside of there. And so those are the queens. And then the drones over on the left side, lower part of the picture, are a little taller and a little bit bigger in diameter than the worker cells, which are in the middle of the picture, more flat, not as big around. So those are the workers. The empty holes in this picture are either where newly emerged baby bees have come out, or there may be an egg inside, or there may be baby bees that are developing in the bottom of that little cell. Life in the hive, the workers. The workers make up 99% of the hive's population. They do everything but lay eggs. You see on this little girl, there's a little orange pollen basket on the back legs. They don't all have this, but when they start flying out to forage, some of the bees their job is to bring back pollen, which is a protein source for the bees to eat. And she stuffs that into that little pouch, which I call her cargo pants, and brings it back to the hive where another bee will be waiting for her to help her unpack it and then store it in the hive. Worker bees sting to defend home, and they die doing it. You don't want a bee to sting you because you know that means they really meant business, and that means they're going to die. If you ever reach your hand into a plant that has a lot of bees on it, they are not going to sting you because they don't even notice you're there. Their job when they're in that plant feeding is feeding, period. All they want to do is get the nectar or pollen and get back to the hive. I've reached my hand directly into really busy teeming plants, and I have never had any of them bite me. Now, if one goes up your sleeve or you pinch one, that's a different story. The lifespan of worker bees is 6 weeks in the summertime, and they can live longer in the winter because they're not flying and they're not working as hard. But in the height of the season, when they start flying at half their age, they are not going to live very long. Now, here's what the jobs are of the bees, which I found completely fascinating when I started studying the bees. They start off as house bees. For the first 20 days of a baby bee's life, they do not go outside the hive. They're always inside doing different jobs. Worker bees from ages 1 to 4 days, and these are all the women, of course, the girls, the first job is to clean out the cell she emerged from. And because the drones, the boy bees, don't do anything for themselves, the little worker bees are also cleaning out their cells. So that's their first 4 days, is cleaning out cells. From 4 days to 12 days, they become nurses. They're feeding baby bees. They can be like a helicopter mom with the baby bees and check them way too often. And they tend to the queen. They feed and groom her and remove her personal waste. As we said, she's busy laying eggs. She can't take care of herself. So that's the job of the workers. Starting in 12 days and until 20 days, they have a few more jobs. They produce wax and build comb. In this case, this bee is showing you the 8 little glands on the back of her abdomen where she makes wax. And the wax comes out clear liquid, and as soon as it reaches the temperature of outside, it solidifies into these little globs of wax. Another worker will come up and take those little globs off of her and take it away and build comb with it. At this age, they receive and store nectar and pollen. So they wait at the front door of the hive until the forager bees that are flying have come back multiple times a day, and they leave their little payload of what they've found outside the hive. These girls take it and store it in places in the hive. They perform climate control. With a bee in the bee world, climate control in the winter is hovering around a lot of times the brood chamber to keep the baby bees warm. A lot of bees will just be there all at the same time, mass heat. In the summer, they'll stand in one place and use their wings to make a fan effect to cool things down. They're undertakers. You might guess if a bee only lives 6 weeks, there are going to be a lot of dead bodies laying around, and they don't want those in the hive. So one of the jobs of the baby bees is to get rid of those dead bodies. They're guards. There are guards posted at the entrance to keep bees that don't belong there and any insects and anything else out. There are also guard bees in the area where the honey is stored to make sure nothing happens to the honey, because that's their food storage. Also 12 to 20 days, they're determining the sex of offspring. The workers at this age share that job with the queen, who indicates to them, let's say she's going to want to make drones, then they know the workers know what size cell to make for the drones to go in, and that egg is going to be a drone, so that information has to be shared. They secrete royal jelly at this age, which is fed to all the baby bees the first 3 days of their lives, and to the queen bee until she pupates, and then as an adult. They're making royal jelly to feed her. Now this picture shows the top 4 cells are baby larval stage bees. They look like little grubs. They're swimming in royal jelly, and they're just happy as clams, and they're eating and they're having a good time. When they get a little bit bigger, 6 days of age, they will make little cocoons, pupate, and then the workers will close the top of the cell until they hatch as an adult. All right, they're grown up now. They're 20 days old, and they're ready to leave the hive for the first time they've seen broad daylight and flying. The first thing they do is orientation flights. They go outside the hive and they do a geometric pattern, up, down, side to side, gradually getting larger and further away from the hive until they have pinpointed the entrance to the hive on their little brains, and they no longer have to think about where they have to go home. Between this process of orientation flights and smelling the guard bees' pheromones and the queen, they know exactly where their home is and will never go to the wrong hive, even if there's one 3 feet away. They know which hive is theirs. And if you ever were going to get a beehive, it's wise not to place the entrance in any place where you're going to walk past, because they are so intent on getting back and forth from the hive, they may not see you, and you may have bees whacking up against you as you're walking past them, because they're intent on getting back home. They're not looking at you. So that's orientation flights. All right, this one's more complicated, but equally totally fascinating to me. The diagram, this is called the waggle dance. The diagram shows the sun, and at a certain angle to the sun, a flower. Now, the bee has found that this red flower is a tremendous place to get nectar and or pollen. And she wants to let everybody know in the hive where it is. So she goes back to the hive, and then you look at the photo and you see this little blurry body where everybody is standing around watching her. She makes a little straight line up the side or inside the hive like that. And then look back at the diagram, it shows kind of a squiggly line. That's not, she's not actually squiggling, she's just wiggling up that straight line. That straight line indicates the exact direction, if you leave the hive, where to go to find that flower. Now, the bees that are watching her are going to gather that information from what she's doing and be able to go out exactly to where she said that food source is. Somebody in one of the talks I gave asked, how does anybody know this? Inside the hive is always dark, but the bees can obviously see, and the scientists must have had some little low light camera inside there that would have recorded something like this for them to learn about this kind of really amazing behavior that a bee can do to communicate where the food is. All right, we're still 20 to 47 days. We're still out there visiting lots of flowers. It takes 5 million flowers to make 1 pint of honey. So is it any wonder that these things don't wear themselves out working? They can forage a 2 to 3 mile radius from home. They would prefer, obviously, to have something closer to home, but they'll go a long way to find it if they have to. And she works herself to death. If you ever take a picture of a bee that's been flying, obviously it's outside, and look at its wings closely, a lot of times they're very tattered because they've been flying. They've been working hard, and it's no surprise that they die in such a short period of time. Other bee activities. If anybody has ever seen this, which is called a swarm, it's not a beehive. It's a group of bees that have left home and are looking for a new place to live. That is all bees. It probably is around 5,000 bees. There's a queen at the very center of that little cluster. And if you ever see this, we had one in our pasture this spring. It is the eeriest thing because it hangs, literally hangs, but they're all hanging together in this big giant cluster. And it usually happens in spring when the hives are actively growing and it's making of a new colony. It's the original queen who decides it's just too crowded here. I got to get out and make my own house somewhere else. So she takes about half of the workers with her and she takes off. Before she goes, the workers stop feeding. She indicates to them that she's going to go. They stop feeding her so that she loses a little weight so she can fly. And the workers that are going with her gorge themselves on the honey that's left in the hive, or that's in the hive, because they know they're not going to eat for a while until they have a new home set up. They won't be able to store food, and a bunch of them won't be able to go out and gather food. So they're going to have to get by without eating for a little while, which is one reason why swarms are usually extremely gentle, because they've been eating, they're full, and they're also, again, on a mission. Their job is to cluster together like this to protect the queen. So after this group leaves, the queen and half of the workers, the remaining workers already knew she was going. They already start making baby queens to replace her. If you ever see something like this, you should call your local beekeepers as soon as you can. In Sacramento, that's the Sacramento Area Beekeepers Association. They have a list of people who will come out and catch swarms. And I called them, and I had somebody at my house in 45 minutes after the call. I had seen this swarm probably 2 hours before that. She came out, and I would say within 5 minutes, we cut the branch that mine were in a tree too. We cut the branch that the swarm was on, and she lowered it into a 5-gallon bucket, put a top on it, and off she went. A few of the workers came back after the swarm was gone that had been out scouting, because there's some bees that will leave this group and go out and scout for a new place to live. And they came back and I felt kind of sorry for them because they didn't know where mom went. The queen was gone. I think what happens is they eventually go and find another place to live, and merge in with a new colony. Anyway, have somebody come and get it for you. They come and get it for free. They love to have it because it starts a new hive. Or if you have facilities, you want to have a hive at home, it can be your own, but they'll do it for free. The beekeepers are wonderful people. But you want to get it pretty quick, because what this means is these bees are trying to find a place to live, and you don't want this to happen. If they find a place, it isn't always the place we want them to go. We don't want them to get through a little crack in the window, like in this wall picture, and get into the wall of your house and build it there. And they will. You can see, obviously, the opening in the wall was just a small place around the window, but there they are, filling up the wall. The other picture is a chimney. It's also a real easy place for them to get into. You don't want them there either. And you don't have to kill bees when they get to this point. You can, again, the beekeepers will be happy to come out. They are experienced at taking beehives like this and taking them without killing the bees and setting up a new hive for somebody somewhere else. In the worst case scenario, you could call a pest control people, but you don't have to. You can call beekeepers and they'll take care of it for you. Another interesting bee activity, this is my hive in the spring. Actually, it was probably more like late spring, maybe June. It was a very warm day and I went out and what the heck? And it was the evening and these bees were hanging all over the front of my hive. I thought they were swarming, but it's called bearding, and they do it in the summer when it's hot. If all those worker bees went inside the hive, it would get too warm in there and it might melt comb or be too warm for the baby bees that were inside the hive. So they wait outside until it cools off. And the next morning they were all gone. They were inside the hive. But it's a very eerie thing to see. Anytime you see a bunch of bees at one time, it's eerie. All right, a little bit on challenges. I'm not going to go deeply into this because it's too depressing, but colony collapse disorder is defined as the abandonment of the hive. What happens is most of the workers will leave the hive. They'll leave a probably perfectly fine queen and a few workers to take care of the babies, but the hive is going to die because they're not going to be bringing in extra food and it's not going to grow. So it's kind of sad, but the reasons for colony collapse disorder are many, and the scientists don't have any real ideas specifically, but there are lots of things. Habitat loss, we're building too many subdivisions and roads and shopping centers. We're covering up all the native plant areas where the bees were happily eating. We use too many pesticides. What I always like to tell gardeners is, so you have a rose bush and you don't like aphids on the rose buds when they come up in the spring. And the garden stores, I think California is getting tighter and tighter, but I think a lot of garden stores sell a fertilizer that has a pesticide in it. It's called a systemic pesticide. You put the fertilizer on the plant and the plant takes it up as fertilizer and it takes the poison up with it. And then when the aphids try to eat the rosebud, they die because they get the poison from the plant. Well, take that one step further. Now the rose has bloomed and it's open and the bees are in there getting the nectar. Well, guess what? The nectar has poison in it too. So think about what you're doing in the garden and what the consequences of that might be, and then you just make the choices from there. We need pollinators, and the less we do to destroy them, the better. Poor nutrition is another problem for bees. You may know that most of the time bees are trucked with big flatbed trucks covered with beehives to various locations. In California, we have a huge almond bloom in the spring, and they bring hundreds of thousands of bees to California, to our orchards, to pollinate those trees, which means they eat what's close by if they can, and they like almond flowers, so that's all they're eating for that period of time. And then the owners truck them back up and sometimes leave them boxed up on the truck for a while until they find a new place for them to go where they're going to eat only that. So poor nutrition is an issue. Parasites, you probably heard about the mite problems. We'll talk about that in just a second, but that's another problem that's bothering them. It weakens them to the point where they have other problems. In 2019, last year, 43% of beehives failed. And that was up. It's going up every year, but it's up from 40% in 2018. So this is a big deal. The bees are definitely struggling. Just a little bit on varroa mites. All bees have them now. They came to the US in 1987 through ag transport. They believe they came from South America. It's not for sure. Almost every country in the world has varroa mites now because of ag transport for the work that they do. The mites reproduce inside the brood cell. They're very smart. They figured this out. They're safe in there because most mite treatments that would penetrate a brood cell would probably kill the baby bee. So they're safe. They're reproducing like wildfire in there. They tend to weaken the adults when there are enough of them. And then the adults are subject to a bunch of different diseases. One of them is deformed wing virus, which is what is shown in this picture. You can see the mite on the abdomen of this. This is a drone bee boy. But notice the wings, they're deformed. That bee will never be able to fly. Now, if it was a worker bee, she would be very busy in the hive. And the first 20 days of her life, all the jobs she would have to do, she could do just fine. But when the time came for her to go out and bring food back for the hive for its longevity, she wouldn't be able to do that. So deformed wing virus basically kills the hive because it eliminates their ability to bring in food. Their scientists are really working hard on getting a bee through several generations that can be resistant to the mites. They're trying to get bees that don't need treatments to get rid of the mites, that can live in tandem with the mites. They're not there yet. There are some wild populations that they're trying to cultivate in enough numbers that they can share. So we're going to live with the mites. Let's live with them and not have the bees suffer so much. Time will tell. So how can you help? Well, obviously, the fun part of it would be to plant flowers. It's wonderful to have lots of things blooming, but one thing we need to think about is having them bloom over a very long season, because bees are going to be flying. If it's warm in February in California, they're going to be looking for food, and as late as November. So something needs to be blooming every month of the warm season. Some plants do bloom long seasons, but you might also just consider going to the nurseries, the garden stores, every month of the year and see what's blooming and get that. Now, some months of the year in California are really hard to plant, like in the middle of the summer when it's 110 degrees outside. But if you take really good care, you might be able to get plants to survive, and then you will have something that will bloom in the summer. Same thing with the fall. Try to look for plants that are blooming in the nurseries in August and September that will continue to bloom during that late part of the year. Then you're feeding the bees all year. They like daisies, anything with an open center. If you think about it, plants that have been hybridized to have lots and lots of petals, and we like that, we think it's really pretty, but if you can't see the center of the flower, the bees aren't going to be able to get in there and take nectar from it or pollen. So plants that have big open centers are usually the best for bees. They like sunflowers a lot, and mostly because sunflowers have a lot of pollen, which is protein for the bees, and nectar. Be careful when you buy sunflower seeds. If you like to cut sunflowers to bring in the house, the hybridizers have very happily made a wonderful sunflower for you, which doesn't make any pollen. So there's no mess on your dining room table if you have sunflowers sitting in a pot there. The problem with that is those sunflowers don't make any pollen, which is the protein source for the bees. So maybe look for packages of sunflowers that some may be pollen free for you to cut, but others that have the regular pollen that the bees can take and eat in the wintertime. Herbs are great. I have a little African blue basil video, really short, 17 seconds on my YouTube channel, where I show all kinds of pollinating insects eating on a African blue basil plant. They lose their minds over it. It's fantastic. It's a basil that never makes seeds, only makes flowers, and it can only be reproduced by cutting. So it's a wonderful, just a show plant. It's pretty for you too. Lavenders are great because there are lavender plants that pretty much bloom every month of the year, different varieties of lavender. You can get lots of color. Here's a list of actually low water use plants that bloom at different times of the year. This is provided by UC Davis and their honeybee haven. You can see there are plants that do bloom every month of the year. So you can get things that do bloom. There are lots of different ones, more than this list, but you could freeze on this frame of the video and get some ideas for things you might want to try. And here are some resources. Sacramento area beekeepers for us. If you live in a different area, you'll want a different beekeeper group, but these people have a list of swarm catchers and beehive that got themselves going in the wrong place catchers, people who will come out and help you with bee problems. And then the UC Davis Haagen-Dazs Honeybee Haven, and my YouTube channel. A couple ways to get to that. You can freeze this frame if you're going to need to write it down, but these are ways. This video will be there, and also my video on the African blue basil and all the pollinators on it. And that is the end, and I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in person someday.